In 1959, the Ilwaco High School boys basketball team had an undefeated season coached by the legendary Don Lee. On March 13th, the locals went a little crazy when the state championship game in Olympia, which Astoria radio station KVAS had promised to carry, was not being broadcast due to technical difficulties. In the second half, the signal was finally found and townsfolk could listen as their fishermen defeated Harrington 79-53 to become the state champs. When the bus arrived back from the tournament at the Capitol, there was a spontaneous parade down the main strip, complete with local ambulances and police sirens along the way. For a magical night, it felt like Ilwaco was the center of the universe.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Blue Canary. The bird has landed on beautiful Bainbridge Island, conveniently located at 499 Madison Avenue. ASE Master Technician Clint Ramsey brings over 15 years of experience, award-winning diagnostic skill, and a desire to reinvent the automotive repair experience. Schedule an appointment online at bluecanary.biz or call them today at 206-451-4220.
I'm Maria Metzler, the Executive Director of Helpline House. The global pandemic has affected us all differently. If you or your neighbors need food assistance, mental health counseling, rental assistance, or Parks and Rec vouchers, please reach out. Helpline House can help in many ways. Find us on the web at helplinehouse.org. It's what we do. Neighbor helping neighbor.
I got something for your mind, body, and soul. I got something for your mind, body, and soul.
You have found the B.I.STANDER Podcast. Now here's your host with the most, Tiny Tim.
What's good, Podcastville? You found the B.I.STANDER Podcast. Happy generic time of day to you. Today, I'm welcoming in longtime friend and guest, Joel Underwood. How you doing, buddy?
How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to be seen. Good to see you. So Joel has stepped out on me and is doing his own thing, not just co-hosting. And I'm thankful for all the times that you do co-host with me, and I look forward to more of them. But you got a new podcast called Song on Main Street. Is that the correct title?
A Song for Main Street, yeah.
Song for Main Street.
Yeah.
Street. And you can find that on Spotify and Buzzsprout.
Hopefully Apple Podcasts soon, too. I'm waiting on confirmation from them.
Yeah, it takes a minute to get on all those platforms, for sure.
Yeah.
So tell the listeners a little bit about the idea of this podcast and why you decided to do it.
Sure. So I guess it kind of goes back to the fact that it actually has its roots, truth be told, kind of on this show, one of the last times we were together.
That's right.
I was watching what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. I've been, you know me, I've been like a political observer for a while. I've been troubled by the state of kind of what's happening in America. And one of the big themes that I'm seeing and that I've been seeing for a while is that rural small town America and urban city America are losing the ability, in my opinion, to speak to each other. They are not sometimes even talking the same language, let alone recognizing that we're all going through some of the same stuff. We're all dealing with some of the same problems. We all have some of the same dreams and goals. We want to be safe. We want to raise good kids. We want our schools to be good, all that sort of stuff. And I have always kind of felt like I have a foot in both worlds. I was born and raised in rural North Carolina. I had a restaurant in Shelton, for God's sake, which was, to 10,000 people tops. I've been, spent the last year and a half or so serving sandwiches to those folks. But I've also lived in cities. I left and I went to college in Chicago and Denver and lived in Seattle. And so I feel like I kind of speak both those languages. I have a foot in both those worlds. And January 6th really stressed to me that, when I turned on the TV and I saw those people storming the Capitol, and I thought about some of the lessons of history of things like Pol Pot, the killing fields, stuff as that. I mean, I really got a sense that things are getting dangerously separated. This wedge is really getting bad, and we're reaching a crisis point with this inability for these two Americas to communicate. And so I kind of feel like if you're in a language situation where you've got two parties that don't speak the same language and you do speak both languages, you kind of have a moral responsibility to step in and say, hey, I'll translate. I'll help, And then the last time you and I were here at these microphones, you remember we were talking to Mr. John Perkins about his Touch the Jaguar book, and a lot of what he said really resonated with me.
Me too. I mean, I was deeply affected.
Yeah, no, that was quite an hour we spent with him, and one of the things he said at the end really hit me when I asked him a question about sort of what do we do next? What is the next step? We've decided we want to make these changes. How do we go about making them? And he outlined that 5-step process. And, the first step is, well, what do you do? What do you like to do? What are your talents? What are your gifts? What are your abilities? How can you find a way to do it in a way that helps, that doesn't hurt? And then the other steps go on to, well, what are the obstacles blocking you? How can you start to overcome those obstacles? But the first two really hit me. What do you do? And how can you find a way to do it that help? And so I sat down and I thought, what do I do? What can I do? Well, I'm a history teacher. I'm a researcher. I'm a writer. I'm a songwriter. I'm a musician. And I'm also, I'm an audio engineer. I mean, I'm sort of a one-man show. I can do, in terms of a podcast, I can do kind of the whole thing soup to nuts. I don't have to go out and find other people. So that's kind of what I can do. So how can I do it in a way that helps? So I came up with this idea of going to a small town, doing a podcast and doing a series of them where for a week I go to a small town, and I'm starting out with just Washington towns. But I'd love to expand past that. But Washington's where I live. Washington's what I know right now. And I spend a week there. I get to know the local history. I do some research. I try to figure out what it was like pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Where's it been? Where's it going? I hopefully find a resident who has lived there for a long time. And Pauline, who I interview in the first episode, she's 92 and has lived in Ilwaco her entire life, which made her ideal. And I really try to get a feel for the town, record some of the sounds of it, things like that. And then hopefully over the course of the week, I write a song, and the podcast closes each episode with the song that I've written that has to do with the town, with a terrific story I heard, or a sense of the town's rhythms, or where it is or where it's going. And to do a different town each time. So that's what I decided to do. And the first town I picked was Ilwaco, out on the coast. If you guys have never been out there, it's right where the Columbia River dumps out into the Pacific Ocean, right across the big long bridge out there from Astoria. And I did the first episode, put it up, and the response has been really great.
It's a really good quality podcast, Joel.
Well, thank you, man.
I'm proud of you. And
that means a lot coming from the expert.
I get out of here. I definitely am looking forward to the next one. A couple questions about it.
Sure.
I know you're like myself, one-man show on doing all this stuff. How are you going to pay for all that travel and hotels? And are you sleeping out of your car on a park bench? What's going on there?
So that's the deal. I mean, I started with Ilwaco, very frankly, because I knew I had a place to stay out there. I've got some family that lives not in Ilwaco, but a little farther up the coast, so I could make that work. but yeah, the travel part of it is the part that I will need to finance going forward. Now I'm looking at some various possibilities, applying for grants. I've contacted the Washington State Historical Society, some other organizations like that. For those of you who don't know much about grants and grant writing out there, they don't generally give grants to individuals. They generally give them to organizations, to NGOs.
And only nonprofits, correct?
Yes, generally. It depends on the grant, but yeah, usually. Now, there are some big, huge grants like the MacArthur Foundation where you don't contact them. They contact you. They just they become aware of what you're doing, and your phone rings one day and they say, "Hello, Mr. Underwood, we're from the MacArthur Foundation. What would you do with $250,000? And if they like your answer. But those things are very, very rare. I'm also potentially looking at some sponsorship. I'd love to hook up with maybe like I don't know, like a Super 8 or a Motel 6 or something that really they would be interested in, besides getting mentioned on the podcast, me being able to kind of use them as a home base. Because the other thing that I've really worked on in this podcast is portability. I should be able, with me and my guitar and my laptop and a couple of microphones, to be able to do the whole thing soup to nuts in my motel room with some Wi-Fi. So, I'd go and spend some time at local libraries and museums, things like that. But when it comes down to the recording, I could do the whole thing sitting in a motel room. I went and recorded the interviews with Pauline and Luann at Luann's Coffee Shop, which was a great little place to do that. But recording the guitar and the song in the room, mixing it right there in the room. As you well know, anybody who's got even basic audio software on a laptop now has at their fingertips more audio engineering software than the Beatles had when they made Sgt. Pepper, or Brian Wilson had when he made Pet Sounds. I mean, things are just incredibly advanced now. And so portability and the ability to do the whole thing in one place is a big deal. I don't have to go into a recording studio. I don't have to hire an engineer. I don't have to come back to Seattle and get it mixed down. I can do the whole thing right there. So maybe thinking about taking it to some rental car companies and seeing about potentially some sponsorship that way, to sort of almost do it as a travel podcast, because people, a lot of times these small towns are really great places if you've never been to Ilwaco, geez, go on a summer day, go for one of the fishing derbies or something like that. These little towns are hidden treasures. They're really great. And if we don't, I think one of the primary messages of the podcast is if we don't sort of treasure them and pay attention to them while they're around, we're going to blink and turn around, and some of them won't be. And they'll get eaten by some closer cities, or they'll get eaten by unincorporated Pacific County or whatever. And we're going to lose a lot. And we, in some cases, might not even know what we're going to be losing, but it'll be way too bad.
Well, I just look at downtown metropolis Seattle and how much we've lost, with the jobs and the shuttering of businesses and stuff. And then I listened to a podcast about Ilwaco, and, there used to be a rail system. They have supply chain issues. They have fishing conflicts. They have limited seasons for the razor clam and fishing. So
yeah,
it's not always 24/7 open for business. And you have a small demographic of 1,000 people or whatnot. That could easily become a ghost town, quicker than anything.
Yeah, well, right now, of course, we all want to talk about COVID, and rightfully so. It's the shaping force of our time. But a lot of these little towns, they were on the ropes, down for the count before COVID ever came along, right, because of this, that, or the other, whether it's the salmon going away, or, I'm headed out east, I think next. I might be headed out for Sprague. Sprague is sounding attractive to me, and it's about the right size. And I have a place to stay. So, these towns that maybe the interstate came through, and then suddenly they did, in the 1980s, they did a business bypass around. So you didn't have to go through town anymore on the interstate. You could stay up at 65 and just zip around it. And suddenly just things start closing down and boarding up, and you can miss it completely. And then COVID comes along, right? And exacerbates all that. Now you've got these towns that were already struggling, these local little coffee houses that were already fighting to keep their price point against the Starbucks, and these little bookshops that were already fighting to keep their price points against Barnes and Noble and Amazon. And now it's not, people are being told it's not safe to go. They're boarding up. They don't really do mail order and takeaway. And again, we're going to turn around and this stuff is going to be gone, and we're not going to hear it go even.
Yeah, there's lots of problems. I mean, you think about how difficult it is for the average person to get a vaccine. Now think of somebody rural that's, miles and miles away from a major city or a distribution point. And, just you take for granted the gas station or the supermarket. I was thinking about that after listening to the podcast, that it takes about 10,000 people to have a supermarket move into your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you have
talked about that
small demographic there. Then what moves in a poor community like that is like the dollar store becomes your grocery store.
Yes.
And it doesn't help your health. It becomes a horrible situation. And
yeah, I'm sure you've had people on the podcast. I'm trying to remember who I heard was talking about this that you interviewed, but the idea of the food desert, right? Even though you're in a civilized area, even though you're in maybe even an urban downtown section, let alone a small little town like Ilwaco out in Southwest Washington, and you don't have enough people to make a Safeway go, and so you've got people getting their food from the 7-Eleven or the dollar store, like you point out. Well, I mean, there's been study after study after study that then your nutrition goes in the crapper, and that's the only food you can get. Not to mention it can sometimes be more expensive, and it's harder to eat healthy. And not to mention, let's say you're an older person, so you don't have access to driving, perhaps, and so you're sort of limited to what's close to you. It can turn into situations like food and nutrition deserts very, very quickly. And again, these are not unique problems to any one area, to any one race, to any one state, to anything. But when we start looking at the place we're at, whether it's in the middle of downtown Seattle or on Bainbridge Island or whatever, and we think that other people, because they live in other places like Shelton, whatever, they don't have the same problems I do. They don't have the same needs I do. They don't want the same things I do. Well, that's where it begins, right? That's where that division starts. And when the stories about them come on the news and those people are mad because their taxes are being raised, and yet they're never going to drive on the West Seattle Bridge or go on the light rail, and they're mad about that, I just dismiss them. And when we start dismissing one another, that sows the seeds of this division.
Yeah, I was talking about that, about bicycles, often actually, about the angst between the vehicles and the bicyclists, and what are the perceived right-of-ways and laws and such. And a big thing is tabs for your bicycles. So a lot of people come from this thought process that my tax dollar from my car tab pay for these roads. You're not contributing as a bicyclist, and you want bike lanes. Hey, I would gladly pay a tab if every road had a bicycle lane. You know what I'm saying?
I think a lot. Yeah, I think a lot of bikers would.
It's not a division between us. It just hasn't happened.
Right, and it's that kind of thing. It is the willingness to even attempt, not see from somebody else's point of view, but even to attempt to see from somebody else's point of view. I mean, if you're living out in Spokane, or let's say even not even somewhere as big as Spokane, if you're living out in Cheney or Medical Lake or somewhere out east, and you look in the paper and your property taxes are going up again to pay for a transportation project in Seattle to help with the 520 bridge from Seattle over to the east side of Lake Washington that you may never in your life drive upon. Okay, somebody can explain that to you. Somebody can logically lay that out to you, but you can't blame people for being a little upset about that. And if you see it from just their point of view for a second, it doesn't That's where it begins. If we can talk about it, if we can have a discussion, if we can, the Romans had a great saying. I'll translate it from the Latin. If it can be mentioned, it can be managed. If you can talk about something, if we can at least begin to have a dialogue about it, we're already on the road to making it better. But it's the things where we decide, well, I can't even talk about that with you.
Hasn't society kind of just picked their side before the conversation even happens?
Yeah, and there's nothing that you can say. It's like arguing with people on Facebook. There is nothing you're going to read. There is nothing you're going to see that's going to change your opinion. You're just howling out into the void. And that's not harmless. It really isn't harmless. We saw on January 6th, that is not harmless. Things can get to a point where those divisions can become violent. And the next thing you know, you got people storming the Capitol. You've got people getting tased and shot. And this stuff can get to a point of violence very, very quickly.
A little off the topic here. Have you heard Michael Cohen's mea culpa, the attorney for Trump?
I've been following him a little bit. I liked his retweet yesterday that, like, anytime the New York Attorney General wants to talk to you, it's not good. It's not good.
I mean, his podcast has been very centered on the January 6th incident at the Capitol.
Yeah.
And just the way the justice system works in certain fashions, but not always equal for everyone.
Definitely not equal for everyone.
Pretty interesting. I mean, I gained a lot more respect for him after I heard him on a more regular basis speak. So tell the listeners a little bit about Ilwaco. Ilwaco. I just love saying it.
Yeah, Ilwaco, which is, by the way, the name is derived from Ilwaco Jim, who was the last Native American chief of the Chinook tribe in the area. Or it might also be derived from the Chinook word that means where the trail comes out, or in this case, where the river comes out, because it's where the Columbia River dumps out into the ocean. Just fascinating people everywhere you look. You got to remember, by the time Lewis and Clark get there in 1805, they're sad. They're upset because their mission has basically, everybody forgets this, the Lewis and Clark mission was a failure. They were supposed to find the water route from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean that doesn't exist. And so by the time they get out it was called Cape Disappointment for Pete's sake. But by the time they get out there, they're upset, they're disappointed. There's nobody there. The Chinook tribe by that time has basically vacated. But there are just these really, really cool stories of these pioneers who showed up in the area and not only would not take no for an answer, but have these incredibly colorful backstories. One of the guys was in the early days was a ferry boat captain who used to run people back and forth across from Astoria in his boat. But he actually thought he could cross the Columbia River even in a canoe, and gets swamped one night in a storm, drowns. But one of the interesting things is that there have been a lot of shipwrecks out there, because there's sandbars out there that you can't see. Well, he salvaged a lot of shipwrecks. And so there's this legend that in his house, which is one of the first big houses that really got built in the area, he buried all this treasure. And you don't think of Ilwaco and Long Beach and places like that as places where you go and hunt for buried treasure. But literally hundreds of people have come through the years, and the property owners have been very cool. They're like, people have been bringing out metal detectors and divining rods and trying to search for this lost hoard of gold that no one has ever found. There used to be a train that ran back and forth that was really one of the biggest sort of highways of commerce up and down the peninsula, that was really neat, but people don't know. You could like book the train for you and a party of people to go see like a beached whale, or to go have a party, or things like or you could just, if you could get up to the tracks close enough as it was coming by, you could like flag it down and it would stop for you. If you've ever ridden like the Seattle Light Rail, just imagine that, or the Seattle streetcar, just being on the street and you could just wave it and flag it down. I mean, that was the kind of place Ilwaco was. They won the state basketball championship in 1959 with an undefeated season, and had this incredible mini parade through town that was really neat. And Pauline, who I got to talk to, who is 92 years old, and she's just wonderful, very nicely gave me an hour of her time at this beautiful little coffee shop. She was the ninth of 11 children, and her family goes back there almost to the founding. She lost a brother. Her one of her brothers was working on the bridge from Ilwaco over to Astoria, the famous Wegler Bridge that's still there, and he fell. And fell out, and she lost a brother. I mean, there's all this amazing little history there. And the interesting thing is, the way I sort of planned the podcast is I would go to the town, whatever town I go to, and I would spend the first couple of days in libraries in the local museum. Well, that's not really possible right now. Pacific Heritage Museum is there. I heartily encourage people to go to it when it opens back up, but it's closed right now. And so I kind of had to do a lot of oral tradition mining. And luckily I had Pauline, who was 92, had lived there her whole life, and Luann, who owns Old Town Coffee right on the main square there, who also her family had lived there her whole life, who were both willing to talk to me, knew everybody. And it was just a terrific resource. So yeah, I hardly, again, go when things start to open up, and does it feel to you kind of like things are starting to maybe open up a little bit? This is starting to ease?
How it feels to me is enraging.
What do you mean enraging? How does it?
I just feel like people have fatigued out. They're much more lax in how they approach things, and we're like, hey, I gave it a year, I'm done with it, screw it, I'm over it, I'm moving on regardless. And I mean, how many people are still washing their hands for 20 seconds and using sanitizer when they touch things in the grocery store? And the vaccine rollout has been much improved since the Biden administration has came on and just kind of cleaned up the supply chain. It sounded like there wasn't a good system, that the Trump administration just thought it would just roll out and it would work.
Right.
And we saw that didn't work early on. But we're still at only about 20%, and we have massive amounts of variants coming out of this virus, and Europe's feeling it right now. There's a lot of danger, and kids went back to school before teachers got vaccinated, which was heartbreaking to me, because you think about who are the teachers. They're the older population. Also, I think the main thing is there's just a lack of substitute teachers too. If a teacher wants to bow out until this vaccine is there, the unions don't always have their back, and they're not guaranteed to keep that job. But it's kind of double-edged sword, because they threaten to, relieve these teachers of their duties, but they don't have substitutes in the wings or qualified younger teachers. I mean, just think about all the high school seniors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
My son's done really well through this situation, but as an 8th grader, he's kind of getting geared up to get prepared for when it counts, right? Ninth grade grades count.
Here it comes.
But that's nothing compared to somebody that had half their junior year taken away from them, or their graduation ceremonies, or last sports seasons and stuff like that. I'm frustrated, but I'm not letting my guard down.
Well, I think that so much of what it really comes down to is where you are and what resources your community has. I mean, that's what things like disasters and pandemics do. They highlight where the inequalities that already were, are coming through. And when you've got districts where, the schools are really nice and the buildings are really good, and the ventilation systems are great and they have all the room they need and can keep the kids 6 feet apart, and the hallways are big and wide and they can lay down lanes, stuff like that, it probably is safe to be doing some hybrid stuff, things like that. But to tell then everybody to go back, and to know that that means, those schools in lower income, not a lot of booster club, not a lot of property tax districts where the ventilation systems aren't awesome and the schools are already overcrowded and they already had a teacher shortage and the class sizes were already too big, and no subs want to sub there.
And they're underfunded to start with.
They're underfunded. And so, of course, subs don't want to sub at those schools. They don't take those calls. And so they're going to have trouble getting the subs too. So what you're going to see, I think what we're already seeing, is a tremendous inequity in who has to go back and under what conditions they have to go back to. Because pretty much every school district, everywhere, certainly this is the case down in Olympia, Seattle, everywhere, you're seeing this all across country, they're always being very careful to say, if you don't feel safe going back yet, if you as a parent or you as a kid don't feel safe going back yet, you can keep doing the home online thing. Well, that's awesome, except that's not an option for a lot of kids. Some of them have crappy internet. Some of them don't have a safe or quiet place to work. Some of them were already drowning with this online stuff because of a lack of resources. And we're incredibly behind in this country in, definitely, you want to talk about something I found out in small town America, incredibly behind in access to broadband. And who's got it and who don't.
And fiber optic cable.
And what we're doing, I mean, there are other countries where everybody just gets it. Everybody just has it. And we don't yet. We need a Tennessee Valley Authority. We need a new deal for internet. But so just to tell those kids, well, okay, if you don't feel safe, you can just stay home. Well, that's not an option. So it's getting really, really clear who's going to be able to do this safely and who's not. And so the question we have to answer as a country is, are we once again willing to throw those at the fuzzy end of the lollipop in income inequality just under the bus like we usually are?
Yeah, your eyes open up. I never thought the insurgents could happen so easily, and that the Capitol was so underprotected. That's eye-opening. And now you kind of know that you gotta take care of yourself at all costs. You can't wait around for somebody else to do things for you, for sure. What was the vaccination rate in Ilwaco? How are they doing?
They're doing okay. I mean, again, there's only about 1,000 of them, and they do have a hospital right there. One of the things Ilwaco does have going for it is right as you drive into town, first thing you hit, there's big church on the right, high school's on the left, and then right after the high school is the hospital. So they do have some advantages that some other small towns way out in, let's say, the east side of the state, rural east, you might have to drive a long way to get yourself some medical care. But pretty much anywhere on the Long Beach Peninsula, you've got kind of two choices if you need emergency medical care. They're going to take you to Ilwaco, the hospital there, or if it's really serious, they'll take you on across the bridge to Astoria, which is the next closest medical care. So, for instance, I was talking to Pauline. She was great, 92. She had just gotten her second shot. And so she was already, in fact, I asked her, you can hear me ask on the podcast. I'm like, okay, what have you been missing? What are you going to go do? What are you looking forward to? And she's like, nothing. I wish church would kind of come back the regular way, because she was a big church goer, but it's not like she's going to suddenly go out and start going to see movies and stuff like that. She wasn't really doing that before, but yeah, people are starting to get vaccinated there, and that's terrific. What they really need is they need people to come there for the summer. I was watching Joe Biden's address earlier this week as he was talking about the vaccine rollout, and his target date, if you listen to that speech, he envisions everybody being able to have July 4th cookouts. If we're at the point where everybody can get together and do some grilling and watch some fireworks for July 4th, that is his target date. And so many of the businesses, whether it's little cafes or charter fishing or whatever down in places like Ilwaco or Chinook, whatever, they count on having a good, solid summer because in winter, even before COVID, the place kind of closed down a little bit. So you made your money in the summer to try to get you through the lean times in the winter. Well, they didn't get a summer last year because of COVID. So they really need one this year. They need their festivals to come back. They need the Kite Festival to come back, and the Salmon Derby, and all these sorts of things to come back. They need people to come down and stay in the little bed and breakfasts and hotels on the waterfront and walk the galleries. And that's what they need. And if we're at a point where we're back and open by July 4th, that would be awesome. And I hope that happens, because there's a lot of places that they could make it through. A lot of places didn't make it through not having one summer. A lot more places could make it through not having one. I don't think they'll make it through not having two. One of my favorite places to play out there with my daughter is a place called Crown Alley. And they are an Irish pub that's a little bit up Highway 101. Played so many wonderful gigs there, and the owner's a great guy and a terrific clientele. They made it about halfway through, and then they closed about 5 months after Bard's Bounty did. It just couldn't go. I don't know if you saw Fido in Seattle. You know, one of my favorite places to go and watch Aston Villa soccer. Gone.
Wow.
One by one. I mean, there's only just so long you can make it, and then you need the people.
Yeah, you need consumers if you.
You got to have the peoples, man.
So, what kind of industry is out there? Is it just charters and festivals and
there's a lot
fishing and
there's still
clamming?
Fishing and clamming. There was the Canaries. Obviously, when you're in Southwest or Western Watch, you're talking about timber. There's timber close by, and there's sawmill. But yeah, you've got to you get out to a lot of those little towns out there. Anywhere along Willapa Bay. I don't know how long it's been since you've driven out there, but you hit Raymond and South Bend and all these other, and it's timber and it's shellfish. Those are the biggies. So when one of those, something happens, like for instance, if you don't know a lot about oysters and clams have natural toxins in them that can make them poisonous. Well, those toxins are killed off by the seawater when it gets down to a certain temperature. Well, guess what's happening to the seawater? It's warming up. And so you have years where either A, the temperature doesn't get down that cold to kill off the toxins and they're not safe to eat, or it gets to that temperature so late that you don't really get much of a harvest, and you don't get people, and you've lost the season. And so when that happens, okay, well, there goes 50% of your local industry base. Yeah, so it's tough. I mean, it's again, it's COVID, it's climate change, it's this perfect storm of a place that was already rough and on the ropes before any of this happened.
So, Joel, when it comes to timber, was that hauled out on trains early on, and then now it's got to go down the river on boats and such?
I would assume trains early on, but now, I mean, you pass them on the highway. It's those big timber trucks that just make your life crazy when you're driving at night or on the rain or whatever. And they're just constantly using 101 as the big time timber highway. And that's, you got to be able to get in and out of there. Timber, very frankly, is probably the most stable of those industries, because honestly, it looks nasty when you're driving by and you see all those stumps and everything. But the timber industry in Western Washington actually does one of the better jobs of the disposable industries of harvesting forest and stewarding forest and doing new planting and such as that. So if you had to pick between stability of timber and, let's say, salmon, man, the salmon industry, it's always. Have you heard about these new what was it I was seeing on the news? The zebra clams. These little, it's these tiny little clams, and they're an invasive species. They're not from around here. But when you buy stuff for your aquariums, like moss balls and stuff like that, these things can hide in there because they get them from other waters, from tropical waters and stuff. Well, then people throw them out. And these little zebra clams start propagating, and they get in the rivers and they get in the streams. And what they do is they're really, 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 really sharp, and they line the chutes of the salmon tunnels that they help salmon get over, like the barriers
the
and
ladders.
stuff with. Yeah, the salmon ladders. And so what happens is, for young salmon trying to get through these chutes and these tunnels and these ladders, you've basically just lined them with razors. And it's like these fish are going straight into a Cuisinart. And they don't make it out the other side. And again, these things are non-invasive. And once they're in, they are in. And it can be millions and millions of dollars to try to clean them out.
Yeah.
And so they're begging people right now, man, if you have an aquarium and you've brought in like mossballs or gravel or whatever, man, check that stuff and don't throw it out without looking for it, because these things are tiny, but they're like a lot of invasive species. You get in there and they're like aquatic kudzu. And they're really, really damaging to the salmon population. The salmon population is so important around here, but so few people realize how incredibly, incredibly fragile it is.
Yeah, and
so
the Chinook salmon is the main diet for the orcas.
The orcas, it's a whole big chain, man.
It's my favorite food too.
Oh man, I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Hey, you said something earlier that I didn't understand the term. A divining rod. What is that?
Divining rods. It's a supposedly a spiritual, mystical way of finding something that's hidden under the ground. Usually water, but a lot of times you can use them for other things. You've seen people use them. They kind of like they supposedly are channeling kind of spiritual energy. There's all different kinds. You can have two sticks in your hands that kind of swing back and forth and sort of find it, or you can have a single stick with two hands. And the idea is you're kind of trying to feel for the energy. And when you find whatever you're looking for, whether it's water in a dry area or buried gold or something like that, it kind of starts to pull down towards the ground. There are people who would tell you it's hokum, but there's also people who would say, hey, listen, it's just helping you channel your natural ability to sense energies.
So it's like the Ouija board of,
in a way, finding. Yeah. Hey, look, man, there are 2 people still on planet Earth. There are 2 people. There used to be 5. There are now 2 people who every Easter, they bleed with the stigmata of Christ. They bleed from the hands, feet, and side. Doctors watch them do it. Scientists watch them do it. And there is no reason for it except it's Good Friday.
What are you talking about, Joel?
And they believe heavily in this. Okay, that happens. So to say we understand everything, we get everything. Oh, we understand what works and what doesn't. We know what science and what is hokum. It's like, no, Hamlet was right. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. We don't know stuff.
So Sprague's on your list.
Yeah.
What other small towns?
So I've decided that my upper ceiling is about 1,500, right? I kind of want to go to small places that have about 50, more than that. And you're starting to get into things that, okay, is it a town? Is it a city? Does it have certain resources does it have certain resources that small towns don't have? So I want to keep it at about 1,500, and I want to get a good geographical representation. Like I said, this first season of, let's say, 10 episodes, I want to ping pong around the state a little bit. So I've done Southwest, I've done Coastal. I want to go out east, get somewhere out on the Palouse, probably Sprague. Then I think I want to go somewhere up north towards Omak and get something like deep in the woods near the Canadian border, something up there. There are stories up there that haven't been told. I want those sorts of things. And another place that I'm very, very fond of in Washington that I love is out in the Tri-Cities area around where the Oregon border is and Pendleton and all that. I'm sure there's a little town out there somewhere that has a story that's looking to be told. And by the way, when you come into a town like this and you tell people what you're doing, you kind of expect them to raise an eyebrow of you and look a little askance. No, they're just so happy to see. Oh, they'd love to have their stories told. They love to talk and sort of put up a flag, to send up a flare. We're here. Don't forget about us. They are so pleased to have you and hear about what you're doing. So it's cool.
I think that's the magic of podcasts, is the stories that are told. You know, we've been privy to quite a few ourselves.
You and I have, sitting here, yeah.
Okay. Well, a couple cities, if you're taking suggestions, that I really enjoy and go to often. One is Chimacum. Of course, I'm wearing my
Okay.
keep it local Chimacum corner store
Okay.
hat. Um, you could probably play a gig at Finn River Cider spot out
Oh,
there. That
okay.
fine.
Okay.
There's a pie shop out there. The corner store is awesome. I refereed a soccer game out there one time because
Okay.
they don't have very many soccer referees, and it's hard to even get high schools to come out that way to play. And what was cool was the soccer field was surrounded by farm areas,
Okay.
and they slaughtered a cow and fed the other team barbecue. So the whole game, this meat is grilling
Oh,
slow, and you're
that's what I'm
just
talking
smelling it.
about. That's
And
what I'm talking about.
these Chimicum players were um, less than kind to each other. Kind of like it was a small town. Like they were tired of spending their whole life with the same 10 people on the
Oh
team, right?
yeah, I can see that.
So
Sure.
it got to be kind of a bitching fest within, which I didn't like. But it immediately stopped, and it became super communal after the game when drinks were poured and food was served and all that. I thought that was the day I kind of fell in love with Chimicum.
And little towns like that, man. One of the things that I mean, I always sort of knew this from teaching school, but the Ilwaco story just totally drove this home to me. You get to these little towns, and high school sports are
Everything.
everything. It ain't like Seattle or Spokane or Spokane, even where you can go see the Indians, or Tacoma where you can go see the Rainiers, or Everett where you can go see the Aqua Sox, or there's other sports, or maybe there's a
Mhm.
college team around you can get behind. No, it is high school sports. That's what they got. They live and die with it. You go into
Mhm.
every little restaurant and they've got the calendar for the football team on their wall. And I mean high school, and if again, like I was talking about with Ilwaco, they had one of the first girls basketball teams in the whole state. And when their boys basketball team went undefeated, I mean, they stopped town, they closed schools, they had this amazing parade. High school sports is where you live and die. I remember at when I was at Seattle Academy, a lot of times they had a really good girls soccer team, and sometimes they would get down to where it was them and it was one of these towns in the mountains. I can't remember. It was really good, but it was oh man, it started with a C, but it was up near Duval. But whenever Kashmir, yeah, it was Kashmir. And whenever we got to where we had to play Kashmir, we were like, oh man, because they were all good, because that's kind of all there is for girl athletes in town to do. You play soccer in the fall, you play basketball in the winter, and maybe some softball in the spring, and that's what you do. And so their team was always awesome, and everybody in the town supported the team. Man, high school sports in small town America is what it's all about.
Yeah, that makes me think of well, you're a huge, well, I wouldn't say huge, but you're an avid baseball fan and Mariner fan.
Sure.
There was some type of proposal put on the table from the MLB to get rid of some of their minor league baseball leagues
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
teams. And that's another thing. If besides the high school, the minor league baseball in some of these small communities is everything as well.
It's a big deal. I grew up in Charlotte, and we didn't have, I mean, even a city as big as Charlotte, we didn't have a major league baseball team, but we had a minor league baseball team. And for those of you who've never been, oh my God, go see a minor league ball game sometime. It's the best. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
old rickety wooden bleachers. Used to live in Asheville. We had the Asheville Tourists. You know, the ticket is cheap. You go, you sit in the stands on a warm summer night as the sun goes down. You have a dog and a beer. You can hear yourself think. You get to see these players on their way out or on their way in. Man, minor league ball is just great. And this year, of course, did you see all the changes they're doing with minor league ball? They're experimenting with all the rules changes, and if they like them at the minor league level, they're gonna bring them up to the major league level. No shift anymore. Pitch clock. Pitcher can only go to first base to stop a steal twice, and you got to come off the rubber to do it. So it's easier to balk. And in one of the leagues, they're doing all these in different leagues because they don't want to do them all the same one. And then they're going with automated balls and strikes. They're going with the radar strike zone. So
I like that last one with the radar,
if
the
they
VAR
dig it,
of baseball.
yeah. If they dig it, you'll see these in the major leagues.
And I like the pitch count too. Like some pitchers just take forever.
Forever. And the idea is to speed the game up and also to get, like with the shift on, the bases are getting bigger too. Because people are getting hurt. People are getting with ankles and feet and stuff getting tangled up and things. But the idea is to get the ball in play, get hits, get the ball in play, get runners on the bases. That's when the game's exciting. And so that's what they're going to be trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was a baseball fan when I was a kid, but no longer for sure, because it's such a time sink. And since Dave Niehaus has passed too, I don't listen to it on the radio.
Amen, brother.
Just
by the way, I like
change
Rick
in
Riz.
Players too. What's that?
I like Rick Riz. I can deal with Rick Riz, but Dave Niehaus,
legend.
Dave Niehaus is something. I mean, Dave Niehaus. I often say that my youngest daughter, who's big, she was a big Mariner fan. She likes Kyle Seager, favorite player. She grew up listening to Dave Niehaus explain the game on the radio.
Not tell a story about being on the road with a player like Rick does.
And he was, and the ideas, we'd be outside, she'd be coloring in her book, I'd be grilling on the deck, beer and some dogs, listening to Dave Niehaus do a game, and he taught you about the game. And I always say that if my daughter fell in love with baseball, I drove them on their first date, but Dave Niehaus was the music that they did their first dance to.
Yeah.
My, oh my.
Yeah, well, I hope it all works out. I think those rules are worth giving a shot, and I'm looking forward to improve baseball. The things that I liked was base stealing was really prominent when I was a kid. So there was people like Johnny Bench, Rod Carew, and the Mariners had a guy named Julio Cruz that was just electrifying on the base paths, and you'd see him get in a pickle and he'd win the pickle.
Yeah.
Which now it's like 95% you're going to get tagged out. It was back when it was a little bit more, less rigid, basically.
Yeah. And with big bases and with the pitcher not able to go to first as much, they're encouraging that. They want you to try to steal more.
That makes it more exciting.
They want the game to get more exciting. They want runners on the base paths. The other thing is, even if you don't make it, you get outs faster and the game goes quicker, which is what they want. The game is just that they feel like the game experience for TV is just too long. People aren't going to make that investment.
I want the NFL to bring back the kickoff return too.
Not going to do it. They just the injury stats were just too heavy duty on the kickoff.
Yeah, it was the most exciting play though. Kind of like when
that's why
XFL started, when they put the ball in the 50-yard line and two guys ran at the same time and had a horrible collision. And sometimes there'd be two guys dead on the field and ball still be right there on the ground in the middle. That was a horrible rule idea.
Yikes.
So before we go, I want to talk a little bit about the Hawks, but before that, even tell me and the listeners and I, what's going on with this music lecture you got up.
Talking about what I'm doing on Friday. Every year, I go on and I do a buddy of mine who teaches history at Seattle Academy. He teaches a fascinating class on Seattle music history. And he asks me to come on as I'm a left-handed guitar player, and talk a little bit about Jimi Hendrix, Seattle native, left-handed guitar player, and Kurt Cobain, from around here, not quite from Seattle, but also left-handed guitar player. Two guys who, there are certain musicians that you have to talk, as I say in the lecture, you have to talk about them in terms of pre and post. There is music and guitar playing pre-Jimi Hendrix, and then there's music and guitar playing post-Jimi Hendrix, and they are two very different things. And the same thing with Kurt Cobain. They are flags in the ground. They are game changers. And it's fascinating that two left-handed guitar players from this area were two of those, and there aren't many. There really aren't that many musicians. We lost one not that long ago, Eddie Van Halen, who is another guitar player there's pre-Eddie Van Halen and there's post-Eddie Van Halen. He is a game changer of how you approach music and how you approach the instrument. And so, I'll be talking about that a little bit on Friday and answering the kids' questions about Jimmy and playing and what he did and how he turned what would have been for a lot of players, detriments and problems into opportunities in terms of how he approached the instrument.
Jimi Hendrix was self-taught, correct?
Mostly, yeah. He became Little Richard's guy really, really young. People forget he was backing up Little Richard, and he didn't do it long, because when you're in Little Richard's band, you do what Little Richard tells you to do. And Jimmy had sort of a streak of independence, but you forget he's so young. He comes into the spotlight. He achieves so much so fast, and so much of what we have of him is only about over a 6-year span. And then he was gone. Mm-hmm. He was just gone. And one can only imagine. I mean, can you imagine? We're sitting here talking about recording software and doing things all yourself. Can you imagine what somebody like Jimi Hendrix could have accomplished with like GarageBand on the iPhone? Mm-hmm. What kind of music he would be putting out with the tools that you have today? Just crazy.
Now, was he the first left-handed known guitarist, or was it Paul McCartney?
Oh no! I mean, there've been lots of left-handed guys. McCartney was certainly famous too. A
little bit
as a left-handed bassist. But people didn't really make nearly as much. See, the thing you got to remember is Paul went out, and by the time Paul and the Beatles were famous, Paul was actually playing left-handed instruments. He could go and get some. And you see Paul on that famous thing on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he's playing a left-handed Hofner V bass. Jimmy, till late in his career, is taking right-handed instruments, because this is how he grew up playing, flipping them over, playing them upside down, restrung, because he was just used to that, and he liked having the knobs under his elbow, and he liked having the whammy bar up high instead of down low where everybody does it. He had just gotten used to that. So it's very, very different. Lefties, I as a lefty, I don't know if you have any lefties in your life, but
my son.
Yeah, it ain't a world made for lefties. Things tend to be harder to find, and they tend to be more expensive when you do find them. And so there's a horrible story. Eric Clapton, who obviously a big friend of Jimmy, they were both in London, and Clapton was haunting guitar stores, as you do. You go through and you always step into a guitar store. It's a disease. You look in, what you got?
Yeah, I was talking to G.E. Smith, and he has 700 guitars.
Oh yeah,
he could tell you exactly where he picked up the guitar.
You do. It's a disease. I've got more than I should have. But he found an actual on the wall in a music shop in London. He found a left-handed Stratocaster, actually made left-handed, which is very, very rare. And he bought it, and he was going to see Jimi Hendrix that night. And he said, I will give this to him as a gift. They were going to see, I can't remember, I think it was Yes at the Royal Albert Hall. Well, they go that night, and just kind of chance being what chance is, they ended up being sort of shunted and moved through, and they ended up in two different opera boxes directly across the theater from each other. So they didn't get to meet up, but they could see each other. They could wave to each other across the theater. And Clapton has this left-handed Strat and a blanket. He doesn't want to, and he's just motioning at Jimmy. He's like, I got something for you. See me after the show. And Jimmy's like waving to him. Well, the night being what it was, and people messing with you, like when you're a famous rock star, what that can be. I'm sure there were some drinks and some controlled substances involved. They never met up. He never got to give him the guitar, and he woke up the next morning and Hendrix was gone.
Wow.
That night, he never got to give him the guitar. I mean, that's how fast. And by the way, to this day, Clapton, who is one of my favorite guitar players, will not listen to Jimi Hendrix music if someone else is in the room. He doesn't want to listen to Hendrix in mixed company. He's like, because they don't get it. They don't hear what I hear. Mm-hmm. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to explain it. I don't want to listen to somebody talking about it. I won't listen to Hendrix in mixed company. I think that's very telling.
That's a great story.
Man, we're just talking about everything today, aren't we? This is cool.
I'm going to throw in one of our favorite subjects to end this with. As the Russell turns, what's going on with the Hawks?
Russell's going nowhere. He's going absolutely nowhere. Look, it's a $39 million cap hit they take before June, if they cut him before June 1st, and they don't have the money to spend. This whole thing, by the way, if I were teaching a class on journalism, I would go through this whole thing day by day and show journalism students how this stuff gets out of control. It's all a bunch of like people who won't go on the record, sources say, in quotation marks.
My sources say.
Players inside the organization say, well, and using Colin
somebody
Cowherd,
close to the situation.
Close to Colin Cowherd, who's a big voice on Fox Sports, obviously knows Russell's agent, and Russell and his agent are obviously trying to use him as a mouthpiece. And this whole thing just got spun out of control. Now, that said, lots of people like Russ, like Pete, there was a point where they could have come out and said, hey, let's put this to bed. I'm not going anywhere. Russell's not going anywhere, but they didn't.
I think the agent made a bad move saying, well, we don't want to trade, but if we did.
Well, you got to remember, Russ is his only football client. He's a baseball agent. He's a baseball agent.
That's
and
true.
Things work differently in baseball than football. And at the end of the day, remember, Russell doesn't want to leave Seattle. He just wants the Seahawks to get better. 400 times. He's been sacked 400 times in 9 years. He is going to go down easily. Number 2 isn't even close as the most sacked quarterback in NFL history. If he plays, what we think a normal quarterback's going to play. Of course he wants them to get better. Of course he wants Pete and John to depart from their usual philosophy of you don't spend money on expensive offensive linemen. You spend it on 3 decent offensive linemen because they're always going to get hurt. You need to make them interchangeable. Of course he doesn't want that philosophy. And remember, Russell got Walter Payton Man of the Year. Big honor, right? What did that mean? That meant he got to go to the Super Bowl. That meant he got to sit in the box right there beside Roger Goodell after getting that award. And he got to watch Tom Brady, who Russell wants to be, and Patrick Mahomes, who Russell kind of used to be, play in the Super Bowl. And what was the difference in that game? They couldn't keep him off pat. They couldn't keep him off pat. He got killed, and Brady's jersey didn't get dirty. That game was all about the offensive line. And Russell, you can just see sitting up there. He's just fuming. He's like, man, if I want to be that guy and I want to survive having been that guy, we got to change the way we play.
Okay, so Russ gets Man of the Year.
Yeah.
One of the best awards in the NFL.
Amazing.
After one of the best guys that ever played.
Another reason he doesn't want to leave, by the way, what he means and does with this community. Every Tuesday, or at least before COVID, Children's Hospital. I mean, the guy's amazing that way. He's amazing.
Yeah. I got some news I got to keep under my hat about that, but.
Oh, okay. Ooh, don't be breaking things. All right.
So, oh man, I'm losing my train of thought here. Russell wasn't on the season ticket holder letter, and he had that award, and 4 other players were. Right. That didn't help the situation. Also, KJ Wright won Seattle Sportsman of the Year award for his work in the community. How did that trump Walter Payton award all of a sudden? I mean, they both do great charity work for sure. Yeah. But that was kind of a turn of events that kind of raised an eyebrow in my house.
I mean, again, how it all got started is kind of fishy. How it all got going is kind of fishy. Oh, unnamed sources say, somebody close. There was some gamesmanship going on. But then there was a point where the powers that be, whether it's Pete, whether it's Russell, could have come forward and said, this is groundless, Russell's staying, or this is groundless, we're not letting him out. And they didn't. And the silence was deafening.
Yeah. Russell looked nervous with Dan Patrick, though, when he was saying what he was saying.
Russell, it's interesting. And again, if we're talking about teaching a course in journalism, whether it's broadcast or written, you could take every phase of this and use it as a teaching tape. Yeah. Look at what happens in that Dan Patrick interview. Russell gives his standard interview, and Russell's not a great interview. He doesn't want to say anything wrong, so he gives you the same pat answers and ends it with "Go Hawks." I mean, there's just story after story of local journalists in this town, sports journalists, who after Russell walks away from the microphone, they look at each other and go, I got nothing. Did you get anything? I got nothing. Because he doesn't say anything. Well, Dan Patrick has enough juice that on his own show, he's not going to let you get away with that.
Mm-hmm.
And look at what he said. You know, Russell, that's a very fast and energetic way of not answering my question. Let me ask you again. Boom, boom, boom. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Russell's a good guy, and Russell's been a good guy for a long time, and he's very coachable, and he responds well to authority. Russell is DNA ingrained from the time he could throw a football to please older male authority figures. And when they're mad at you, fix it. When they're mad at you, you've done something wrong. And so when Dan Patrick comes back at him a little hard and says, answer my question, it triggers something in Russell. Oh, my coach is mad. Do what he wants. And he goes off script. And as I have taught, I have worked with football players before in my speech consulting, worked with athletes before. That's what journalists want. They want to get you off script, and that's when you'll say the thing that becomes the big scoop for them. They want to get you off your canned answer. They want to get you off of what you always say. That's why they get you when you're excited, when you're tired. That's why they stick a microphone in Richard Sherman's face as he's coming off the field. I'm the best. Don't come bring that junk with me. That's what they want. And that's what happened. And that's what kind of got all this going. You know, it's a journalism class.
I saw a great video yesterday of NBA players, legends, talking about Seattle's Gary Payton and Larry Bird, and they had everybody that was anybody in the NBA saying that both these guys were the biggest trash talkers ever.
I heard those two, and Reggie Miller was supposed to be.
Reggie
really
was like, I'm not even in their league.
It's interesting because, you know, I've read both Phil Jackson's books, which are great, by the way. Sacred Hoops is good and 10 Rings is good.
10 Rings.
he goes through and talks about the different teams he faced. And when he talks about playing the Gary Payton and Sean Kemp Sonics, he says that the word he keeps using was fury. They were a team that played on the edge of fury. It was barely contained. And George Karl was just constantly trying to keep it under to where they don't just explode, because they played with anger and they played with fury. And it was Sean Kemp and it was the X-Man and it was all these guys who played the game with anger. And that was Gary Payton's game, man. He was playing with anger and he was trying to get you angry. Mm-hmm. They were fun. God, they were fun to watch.
Yes. I love and miss the Sonics so much. So who do you want to see kept? We have something like 23 free agents on the Seahawks. Who do you not want to see go no matter what?
It's tough because you're not going to, that's the thing is this, you're going to see it all over the NFL. Salary cap came down at what? 182.5 million. I mean, every team is going to have to make brutal deep cuts. And this next year in the NFL is going to be football is going to be a very strange game, because a lot of good players are going to get cut for cap reasons. And there's going to be a lot of movement. Here's what I will say. You look at how the New England Patriots stayed so good for so long. And one of their primary philosophies was, when you have seen the best of any player, it's time to say bye-bye. Not that they're getting bad, but when you've gotten the best out of them, they're not going to get any better. It's time for them to go.
Plus they have the most value to your team.
Yeah, sell high. And it makes me wonder, this hurts. As much as I love him, I think we've seen the best of Bobby Wagner. He's terrific. He's a team leader. He's wonderful, but I think you've got his heir apparent in the locker room with Jordan. Who else have we maybe seen the best of, to the point that they're not necessarily going to get any better? Have we seen the best of Tyler Lockett? Have we seen his ceiling? I think we have. Have we seen Chris Carson be as good as Chris Carson can be?
I don't think so there.
I think we've seen him stay healthy as long as he can stay healthy. I have a problem if that they can, what do they say in football? The most important ability is availability. And he's never been able to finish the season.
That goes back to the line too,
Kind of. I mean, yeah. I think
he still averaged over 4 yards a carry.
He did. When he was in the game. I mean, what you're getting, I think we got spoiled for a long time. Marshawn Lynch was just so good, and he's so great, and also such a workhorse and so available. It's interesting. One of the I talked about working with football players on their interview and public speaking skills and helping them get jobs in broadcasting. One of the guys I worked with, who shall remain nameless because I do confidentiality when I consult, but I asked him one time, "Hey man, how often were you hurt?" He was a running back. I said, "How often were you hurt?" And he said, "Do you mean how often was I hurt or how many games did I miss?" I said, "Oh, okay. How many games did you miss?" He said, "I missed one each season every year I played, just by freak accident." He's like, "I was hurt all the time."
Right.
He's like, "Everybody's hurt all the time. If you're not a kicker or a punter, you're hurt. Everybody's hurt every week." He said, "The guys who play, the average NFL football player," I'll never forget, he looked at me and said, "Joel, the average NFL football player wakes up every Monday morning feeling the way that if you felt, you'd call in sick for work." And I'm like, damn, because you don't think, but it's true.
Barry Sanders said, every Monday I woke up feeling like I just got hit by a car.
Yeah.
That got old.
And honestly, what the stats are telling us when they start busting players for steroid use, players don't take steroids to get huge and beat the other guy. No, 9 times out of 10, players take steroids to heal up, to facilitate, because they can't play. They're hurting. And so, yeah, you hate to cut anybody. They've already obviously let Carlos Dunlap go. They're not going to get him back on a cheaper deal. They're just not.
Yeah, I kind of heard some rumblings that they might today.
I don't know. The Ravens were looking. There's just so many teams out there that need edge rushing. And he's going to do what Jadeveon Clowney is going to do. He's going to go out and test the market and
they should
see what his, and sure, you should. You don't want to do what Jadeveon Clowney did and overprice yourself. And think, oh, I'm not going to go anywhere for less than 16 million. Well, guess what? You might, in this market with this low salary cap, you maybe don't get 16. I'll tell you what, do that if you're willing to sit. If you're willing to sit out and miss some games to improve your value, then yeah, do that. But if you ain't, if you're not willing to pull the trigger, don't pull it out of the holster.
Yeah. Jadeveon lost that poker hand for sure.
Well, again, another guy who's hurt all the time, can't stay healthy. Yeah. The most important ability is availability.
I think the guys that I worry about, you said a few. I'd really like to see Quentin Dunbar back. I understand that, it's like a $14 million price range or whatever. I really want to see Chris Carson back, because as much as he gets hurt, all his backups are hurt too. Yeah. And they play less.
How do you feel about Jamal?
I could let him go.
I could let him go too. You can't let him go because that's too. Here's what you can do.
You don't look good if you let him go, but
because of 2 draft picks. But you could let him go. I'll tell you what, if you trade Russ and get some first round picks back, you can let him go. You can't let him go as long as you don't have any first round picks, because you traded 2 first round picks.
Well, I really like how Marquise Blair plays.
I like how Marquise Blair plays, and honestly, what is Jamal Adams? He's a safety who thinks he's a defensive end. Okay, so let's let him rush the passer. Who's back there playing safety? Quandre Diggs is great, but he needs help back there. I'll tell you what, if you're going to keep Jamal and keep letting him rush the passer, you better go crazy at cornerback. You better go out there and get some guys who can cover one-on-one and don't need safety help.
He thinks he's an end. I've never been overly impressed with Griffin at corner either. But
I think he's going to go.
I worry about KJ Wright. I don't think he's ever played better. He's versatile. He's a team leader. He's the first guy that invites the new player into town. He backs it up. He's a huge man, well-spoken, good player. Bobby Wagner has always been my favorite player on the Hawks.
Yeah.
So you were blasting me.
I know, but honestly, these are guys who they can stay if they're willing to give a hometown discount. But KJ's already said he's not.
No, he shouldn't.
So
he's one of the best at his position. I mean,
again, it's a crazy year. 182.5 for putting a team together is nothing, especially if you're paying a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, like Dak Prescott gets $75 million. What's the rest of the team get?
I don't know what and there's a fascinating stat out there. No team has ever won the Super Bowl with their quarterback taking up more than 13% of their salary cap. Yeah. I think Russ is clocking in at about 15 this year. And Drew Brees just retired yesterday.
Yeah.
You never want to get in that New Orleans position where you've got this amazing, incredible franchise quarterback and you can't win the big one because his salary keeps you from surrounding him with a good team, which is what happened with New Orleans for years and years and years and years and years. They wasted his best years paying him, which is a weird thing to say. I mean, the blueprint right now seems to be you gotta get some kid just out of college who's crazy talented, and while he's on his rookie deal making $600,000 a year, you spend all that money on somebody else and you go win a Super Bowl.
Yep, that's what we did, right?
That's what we did. That's what the Chiefs did. That's what you can do now because these kids coming out of college are so crazy good.
Right. All right, Joel. Got to let you go. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
A lot of fun.
The new podcast is Song for Main Street, currently on Spotify. If you are a Patreon subscriber to Podcastville, you can find information about Joel's podcast there. Support the show. If you like it, tell a friend. If you don't, keep it moving. Probably not listening right now either.
If I could just jump in with one thing. If you do go down to Ilwaco or you are in Southwest Washington at all, please, 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 if you want to get something to eat or you want to get something to drink, stop in at the Old Town Coffee Cafe right there on First as you come into town. They were so nice to me. They basically let me take over their coffee shop for the morning. They found me Pauline to interview. They're the nicest people in the world, and they make a darn fine turkey sandwich. And they're the kind of place that we have to keep around unless you want to eat all your meals at Starbucks, which is a wonderful place, but you don't want to eat all your meals there. So the Old Town Coffee Cafe, if you're in that area, please tell them I sent you, mention the podcast, and go and patronize them. Please, please, please. They're great folks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to taking a trip. You've motivated me.
Oh, cool.
And, when you sign that deal with the Travel Channel, please know that I'm really good at Best Boy or Key Grip. Those are titles I can easily manage.
Excellent. Get in the van. Let's go.
All right. Joel Underwood, take care, my friend.
Talk to you, buddy.
All right. Cheers.